Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this week's video. I posted a question on my Instagram this week asking you guys to submit your questions on spiritual awakening. And I think I answered about 10 of those on my Instagram. And so you can find that under my story highlight section on my Instagram if you're interested. But I wanted to save 3 of these questions for this Q&A video because I think that they offer us some great points of conversation. So the first question comes from Instagram user @TooManyCrispies. I like that name, and I hope you're talking about Krispy Kreme donuts because that's my jam. Too Many Crispies asked, what are the key fundamentals of working through and surviving a spiritual awakening? So I would firstly start off by saying that nobody survives a spiritual awakening. It's kind of the point. If you have survived it, you haven't really awakened yet, right? The awakening is awakening out of the person, the belief in being the person. So there is no people who survive an awakening, but I understand probably what the questioner means is, how do I suffer less during my awakening? And I mean, what question could be more important, right? Really, the whole reason any of us are on the spiritual path is simply because we want to stop suffering. And if spirituality didn't offer us any alleviation from suffering, we wouldn't want to be spiritual, would we? So really all of spirituality can be summarized in this question in a sense. How do I stop suffering? What are some of the keys I can focus on when I'm going through this deconstruction process to make it a little bit less severe? Suffering is unavoidable along the journey, but it serves a purpose, right? It's moving us somewhere. So the first key to moving through an awakening is to accept and acknowledge the suffering as that. It is just a teacher. It is not an enemy. It's not the devil. It's not the boogie monster. It's nobody we can point the finger at doing it to me. It's just the consequence of living with a distorted perception of reality. And as I go through this process of undistorting my perception, we can say there's some psychological, emotional pain involved in that process. But that being said, awakening is realizing I'm not the person who suffers. I am the awareness, the observer behind the whole movement of the person, the whole movie screen, the story that's playing on the screen. So the more that we rest in that place as the awareness or as awareness, the more we can watch the person suffering as the person gets deconstructed. And even though we're feeling and experiencing that suffering, it's being watched from a deeper place. And so in a sense, part of you isn't suffering. Like there's pain, but there's no more psychological self who is being diminished that suffers. So remaining as awareness is the key. And the degree to which we're unable to remain as awareness, but we continue going into the story of the person and the belief and all of those things, that's going to elongate the process. So one analogy that I really like to remind myself of, that I typically would remind myself of a lot during my sort of dark night of the soul, is this analogy of the movie theater. So there's a movie screen playing a movie, and there's the observer of the movie, right? The watcher of the movie. So in a spiritual awakening, really all you need to do is keep quiet. Is a phrase that the sage Papaji would use a lot, Muji's guru. Keep quiet, meaning don't get involved with the movie. Don't get involved with what's being watched. Just let it happen. Even if painful memories, traumas, defense mechanisms are getting triggered, and all these old beliefs are coming to the surface and crying out for attention. These are the things the mind does as we starve it of fuel, so to speak. As it's going through the death process, as these beliefs are going through the death process, they cry out for help. They say, hey, believe in me. Don't let me go. Here's all the reasons why you shouldn't let me go, because this bad thing might happen. That bad thing might happen. These beliefs are actually defense mechanisms, right? They're sort of psychological entities our ego has collected that it believes help it keep it safe from reality. This is the way I navigate reality. through these definitions, through these lenses, right? That's what a belief is. It's a lens through which you see reality. So they're not going to go quietly, and nature has designed them not to, because whatever is recognized as being helpful to my survival, psychologically speaking, the mind says, hey, this is useful. Let's not be so quick to let go of this. The mind doesn't actually know what's true or what's helpful. It just knows what you perceive. So if you believed that old belief for so many years was true and you believed it was helpful to you, that's what your mind thinks. So your mind is basically saying, hey, are you sure you want to let this one go? Have you really thought this through? This could be a bad decision for us. That's essentially what's happening during a spiritual awakening. The belief in the person is dying. All of its identities and attachments and desires are dying with it. And so they're crying out for attention. And that crying out of attention is what we call suffering, we could say. Emotional suffering, distress. Feeling uncomfortable with myself. So keep quiet means just watch all of this happening like it's happening to somebody else. Like you're watching a movie of a character going through this. Don't ever be so quick to say, I am the one who's suffering. Because that I who suffers is the person. So an analogy I'll use is, imagine your mind as an empty movie theater. Whatever's happening in the movie is just playing on the screen, the film's being projected, but there's nobody even watching it. Just happening. When we say nobody watching it, we mean no person, right? It's being seen by the one consciousness, which sees everything, but it's not a personal seeing. It's not interested. It's not believing itself to be the movie character. It's just watching with that unconditional loving awareness. So there was a question on the Instagram highlight that I answered on Instagram that asked basically, if we just observe our thoughts but don't get involved with them in some way, isn't that spiritually bypassing? And that's a super valid question. But my answer was just very simply, actually the reverse is the case. If you get involved in the thought at all, in any way, that's actually a form of bypassing. What does bypassing mean? I see this, but I don't want to really truly acknowledge it. So I'm gonna use some spiritual concept to dismiss this thing away, even though I know it's there. Okay, you're getting involved. Awareness doesn't do that. Awareness is truly loving and truly unconditional because it allows everything to be and express exactly as it is without infringement. So that old thought appears and awareness just looks at it and says, hey, dance as long as you want to dance, so to speak. And it just observes. So that thought has been given the full capacity to express itself as it wants. Nothing reached out to grab it and identify with it and claim it as my own. And then it left this reality. It dissipated out of awareness, out of consciousness. So that's actually loving. That's actually unconditional. When we push or pull in any way on a thought or anything, that's us getting involved with it. That is us giving a pseudo reality to that belief. I am this thought. I am this story. That's what prolongs it and gives it life and gives it reality. So to heal anything is to see it with pure unconditional love, which means I let it be what it is. All you need to do is keep quiet. Be like an empty movie theater. There's no other practice you need. There's no other technique that you need. Very soon, this practice of witnessing stops being a practice and it just becomes natural. And you begin to realize, oh, I've always just been witnessing, right? I've always just been observing the activity of the mind, but there was this sort of delusion happening of, oh, me, that's me, I'm doing that. Rather than the truth of the matter is all just happening. All of life around me is just happening. Am I making the cloud move? Am I making that person do what they're doing? Nope. Nobody can even say what the cause of anything is, right? Everything is connected to everything else. It's all just happening. And when I claim anything in reality as mine, I am distorting it. I'm twisting it in some way. And that's what we call suffering. The next question comes from Instagram user @JackPan, kind of along the same lines, who asks, what does it mean to become aware of our true self? And I appreciated this question because I acknowledge that a lot of the things we say in non-duality can sound like we're talking in circles or can just kind of sound like meaningless statements. So when we say, become aware of my true self, the first question is, which self do we mean? Do we mean the fake believed in self or the true supreme self, which can't be named? And obviously we're pointing to the true self, but the paradox is there is no false self that realizes the true self, right? So in a sense, what we could say, instead of the way the question's phrased, is what does it mean to remember my true self? Because that's all that ever happens. The one reality projects the universe of duality so that it can have a separated experience of itself, so it can experience otherness. So it purposefully forgets itself for the purpose of slowly remembering itself. And that slow remembering process is the one reality experiencing itself, learning about itself. So another analogy we could use in the same way of the movie screen and the movie watcher, let's suppose that there's three people sitting on a couch. You're in the middle, a friend on your left, a friend on your right. You're all watching a movie. And you actually, as you watch it, begin to forget you're watching a movie. And you start becoming completely 100% enthralled in the storyline. You believe you're the main character. You're suffering everything the character suffers. So there you are with your other two friends, sitting on the couch, crying out in pain and laughing in joy and all of these things the character on the screen is doing. Okay, so this is what the Course in Miracles calls insanity. The Son of God has forgotten himself, taken himself to be something that is false. The belief in separation. And slowly we gain our sanity back by realizing that it's just a movie we're watching, that we've mistaken ourselves for the character on the movie. So you're watching the movie and slowly this realization sets in that your awareness begins to zoom out a bit and see that you're actually watching a flat movie screen. And your perception was simply so engrossed in that movie screen that all of your consciousness got absorbed into that, got localized into that, and you believed yourself to be the character in the movie. Now, as your awareness zooms out, you go, oh my gosh, I'm just watching a movie. Goodness gracious. How insane have I been thinking I'm this character? All the while, I'm just observing it. But you look over to your left and to your right, and your two friends are still believing that they're the movie character as well. So without shaking them awake, how would you slowly convince them to help them realize that they're just watching a movie? Firstly, you have to change your relationship to the movie, right? So if you're still sitting there on the couch screaming and crying with the main character, they're definitely not going to wake up, right? You have to embody this new awakening, this new presence, this new knowledge of who I am. I'm just the watcher. Whatever happens to this character doesn't happen to me, can't happen to me. It's just an illusion. It's just a story. So you don't become uninterested from life or cold and dead in your relationship to life. You're very much still engaged with it, but simply from a place of compassion. It's still being watched with interest, but the interest has changed from trying to fulfill myself through this story. I am this character seeking fulfillment, trying to overcome an obstacle. Instead of that being what you're doing, now you're looking at the story with the compassion to wake up the other characters from this delusion that they need something to fulfill themselves and that they're a separate movie character. So we realize we're the observer. Now, another way of seeing this could be as a spinning wheel. If you're standing on a wheel that's spinning, right, the farther out you go, the faster you're moving, the more chaotic, the more unstable reality is getting. And that's sort of what it's like to become the person. The more we believe we are this person, the more we inherently believe I am incomplete and lacking and I need to fulfill myself or complete myself. We chase things more. And as we all know, the people who are chasing fulfillment through life tend to be the ones who burn out and hit rock bottom and dead end, so to speak. So the farther we go into personhood, the more suffering is there. The more we're just caught in this interplay between desire and fear, pain and pleasure. And the more we retreat to the center of the spinning wheel, eventually we can get to a point in the very center of the wheel where there's no movement happening. Perfect stillness. And that's what our true nature is. Outwardly is the personality, through the mind, body, and spirit complex being projected into time and space. We have personalities, we have bodies, we have expressions, and all this amazing, beautiful variety. But the more we retreat inwards into ourselves, like in meditation, we contact something within us that's very clearly real. It is more original than our outward expression, but we can't really describe it or say what it is. It's just this perfect, clear, still, but shining I am. There's just a sort of ungiven knowledge. I exist, and it cannot be debated or denied for even a nanosecond. So that is what is most original to us. And the more we abide there, the more that our sense of self rests on that, just that naked, ungiven sense of I am, not associated with any labels. I am this, I am that, I am this age, I do this thing. Just I am. The more we remain there, that is what we call real, true meditation or self-abidance, abiding in the sense of I am. We begin to engage with reality from that level. Okay, so what does that mean? From that level, there are no desires because there is no perceived incompletion. The I am doesn't say I am incomplete, right? It just says I am. In fact, it doesn't even say I am because there's nobody else to say it to. There's no other I am that I am can talk to and say, hey, guess what? I am, right? It just is. There's just the sense of I am, but it's a wordless sense. It's a primordial sense. So when we engage with reality from that place, it's inherently a place of oneness. It's a place of perfect contentment, perfect peace. It is not moved by what it watches on the movie screen. It knows that whatever it's watching is only a play. It's only a particular temporary expression of the one, which makes it valid and sacred, but it is unreal in the sense of, if you imagine an ocean and the waves that appear in the ocean, you can look at the wave as a sort of separate object and say, okay, there's a wave and there's an ocean. And from a dualistic perception, that sort of makes sense. But in reality, there is no wave, is there? All the waves, all the crests in the ocean are illusions. It's just the ocean. There only is the ocean. So the ocean is eternal and the wave is temporary. And all appearances, all thoughts are like that. So the I am, while loving what it sees and acknowledging that as this is an expression of myself, doesn't say, oh, but I need it. Oh, but if I don't have it, then what will happen to me? Right? Doesn't say any of that. So our relationship to life becomes like that. Unmoved, undisturbed, perfectly grounded, perfectly at rest, perfectly at peace. So thank you, Jack, for that question, and I hope that kind of helps illuminate what you were looking for there. Last question comes from another good name, at Caramel Funk, who asks, if there is nothing to find and no one to awaken, then do I just go about my life as usual? And I appreciated this question because I acknowledge that a lot of non-dual teachings can sort of just end up sounding a little cynical or negative even in the act of, the non-dual teachings that focus extremely hard on negation. So you'll hear a lot of non-dual teachers say phrases kind of ad nauseum like, there's no teacher, there's no student, nothing to understand, nobody exists, nothing ever happens. And from a philosophical perspective, you can definitely argue that that's true. And that's one perspective of the universe. That's one valid perspective of the universe. And I've been down that path, that non-dual path of kind of the extreme focus on negation. And I found it to be very helpful in a lot of ways, specifically in terms of deconstructing the belief in the person. The extreme negation path was helpful in doing that. But it can sort of become a cop-out from actually explaining the nature of reality as well. And I don't ever want to do that because there's so much richness here to be experienced. There's so much to be enjoyed and to be known in the dualistic expression of the one. And so I think that it's worthwhile to actually talk about it rather than just dismiss it by saying, nope, nothing ever happens, nothing exists, the end. So really what we mean when we speak of reality in the negative is not that, when we say things like, reality is nothing arising out of nowhere, happening for nobody, right? What we really mean is that reality is far too wide and epic and infinite and mysterious to possibly be described in words. In fact, any attempt to describe it in a positive sense is hilarious and ridiculous. How can you describe infinity in a finite medium like words? So all we do is point to it by saying, that's not it, that's not it, that's not it. So the negation is not like, actually reality is lamer than that, or reality is less meaningful than that, is kind of the way the ego interprets non-dual teachings. Really, it's probably more accurate to say that when we're negating any belief, any idea, any concept, we're saying, nope, reality is way bigger than that, right? Don't pretend like you actually know reality just because you have this concept or this truth, even like oneness, right? That's why it's called non-duality, because even to say one is still a concept that will sort of get in the way of truth. So we simply say non-duality. So we're saying not two, not two-ness, but even oneness is a concept that will serve as a limitation. So we don't say that. We just say not two. We use negation to point at that infinite, loving, and lovable mystery of reality by saying, that's not it. That's not it. Whatever I point at isn't ultimately that. And so we use that practice of negation to get us to the point where eventually something in our perception shifts. And instead of seeing duality, instead of seeing what we're not, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, eventually something in us is able to see, I am that. I am that one unnameable reality that can't be pointed at, that can't be defined. But we got to that point by simply seeing what we are not, right? Through the practice of negation. But that practice of negation has to eventually stop, and we have to go to the I am. So we have to stop saying I am not, and recognize what we are. But that recognizing what we are isn't an effort. Like, okay, I'm going to do it now. I'm ready to make that next step, right? There's no doer who does that process. It happens as a result of seeing what you're not. So stay diligent to that practice as long as it's necessary. And eventually, just the sort of interest begins to wane in negating everything, because there becomes a greater, more expansive view of reality, a wider lens, where you begin to recognize everything as an expression, an extension of my infinite self. I am the dreamer of the dream, and even beyond the dreamer. I'm earlier than everything that can be named. Simply, I am that. And you don't even say I am that, you just know it. Once you know it, there's no need whatsoever to say it. So when the questioner asks, if there's nothing to find and no one to awaken, do I just go about my life as usual? And what we mean when we say that there's nothing to find is that there's nothing to find that was never lost. There is no person who awakens that was once asleep. The person doesn't awaken, the person just dissolves. What awakens is the dreamer, the consciousness which created the person, awakens from its sleep of believing it was the dream character. And so there's nothing new to find in the sense of that which was lost and separate from me and made me incomplete. There's nothing to find in that sense, but there is a new discovery, or we could say maybe a new perception of self to be discovered. So I would say remove the my from my life and just go about life as usual. There's no one living life. There's no separate me who lives life that can have a my life, a life that's separate from life itself. There's just life. I am that one life living this particular body and every other body. I am life experiencing this body is a way you could think of it. From that perspective, that is awakening. So just go about living without a concept of a me who is doing the living. Keep the desire to know your eternal nature as the number one desire. Get really, really clear about what it is you truly want. Take time to meditate on the person's desires. Contemplate them, look at them, be clear about what's present in you, because if there's unmet desires that you're not being honest about, then you're allowing them to continue proliferating and they will continue standing in the way of your self-realization. So get really clear on what it is you truly want. So if the person believes, if there really is a strong urge in the person still that, I'm just not buying this self-realization stuff. At the core of what I am, something isn't believing it. Something really believes that when I get that Lamborghini, I will truly be fulfilled eternally. Or when I hook up with 20 more people, or when I get into that next vacation, that will be my fulfillment. So those desires aren't wrong, they're just misguided. So there's basically two ways you can go about it. One way is to indulge in those desires and give the person everything it believes it needs to find that fulfillment. And just do it with the awareness of, okay, let's see if this really does fulfill me. I'm not going to go into this circumstance blindfolded anymore, like I have been doing, but let me really keep my eyes open and see, did that experience actually give me the fulfillment that ego was promising? And as you allow yourself to experience all those desires and see that they didn't actually fulfill you, then the urge to chase outcomes just begins to lessen over time, begins to be less and less intense, and you find there's more of a desire to just rest in my true self. There's more of a desire to be quiet. There's less that needs to be said. There's less that needs to be done. There's just this sort of falling in love with stillness. And that's because when our desires drop away, the person drops away. Because the person is just really a bundle of desires, a bundle of unmet desires. And so what remains after the belief, I am this person with all these unfulfilled desires, once that drops away, is just a sort of calm, quiet, loving sense, I am. And it doesn't need anything. And it's recognized also as a mystery so deep and so pervasive that you can't even ask any questions about it. What do you do with a statement like, I am that? Can you understand that statement? The magic is in not understanding it. By not trying to get it, you get it. When you let it remain a mystery, I am that infinite mystery that can never be known. Something about that brings an overwhelming peace and quietness in the soul. And that peace and quietness within is projected outwards as love. You want to share your being, your state of being, with all things, that they can have the same peace, that they can have the same stillness and the same love that has become your home. So, to summarize, if there's nothing to find, no one to awaken, hopefully we understand what that means a little bit better now, then do I just go about my life as usual? Yes. Go about life as usual, again, simply with the urge to know who I truly am, and you will see that reflected in everything. Everything becomes a new open door, a new kiss, a new experience, a new touch of your true reality that you can't ever describe, but you see it again and again. You experience it again and again. And every moment is a new, fresh realization of my own being. And that becomes your only desire. The only desire that remains is to abide in this wonderful, perfect, immaculate sense I am. That's what everybody's looking for, whether they know it or not. And so we can only share that by having it first, right? For ourselves, by finding it for ourselves. Another great analogy for this is a moon being reflected on the water. If the moon represents our true nature, and if the water is turbulent with lots of waves and ripples, that's going to distort the reflection of my true nature. So we could say consciousness is that reflection. Our perception of reality serves as the water. And the more distorted our perception is, the more the belief in separation's there, the more turbulent the water is, the more fragmented the reflection of our true nature is. So the question is, how do we calm the waters? And the answer is by disidentifying from them, by abiding in the sense I am and letting go of everything else beyond that. I am the person, I am the story. You have to stop swearing allegiance to those beliefs and just say, nope, I am that. I am that which I seek. And that actually begins to calm the waters. And once the waters become calm and still, there it is. My true nature being reflected without distortion. It was always there. I have always been that. I simply didn't realize it. So nobody awakens and there's nothing to find, because the realization is not, oh, I just became that, or oh, now I'm that, but simply, I've always been that. And that's where spiritual liberation is. Liberation from suffering is not freedom after the bondage. Like, oh, I really was that person who suffered and had all those horrible things happen. And now I've been healed from those things. There is no person who gets healed. It was never true. I was never that person who had those things. Nothing has ever happened to me. I am pure, infinite, eternal awareness, watching a story inside a body, inside a mind, inside a world. Nothing ever happens to I am. So if you know yourself as I am, then you know everything else to be a temporary sort of illusion. Not that it's invalid, not that it's stupid or worthless, but simply it's not what I essentially am. So I don't suffer from what happens on the movie screen. Freedom is before the bondage. I've always been that free I am. Only in that light can we heal anything that's happened to us. If there's still a belief that I was the person who was abused or traumatized or what have you, then you will always need healing from that, because the belief is the suffering. The belief is the trauma. For example, horrible things have happened to all these other people around you in the world, but you don't believe you're them. You don't have their memory to reference, so you don't suffer from it. So it's always a shift in perception, as the Course in Miracles says, a shift in perception from fear to love. That's what the miracle is. And that miracle is given every time the realization happens, I am. Not as a concept, not in words or definitions, but an internal, quiet recognition that what I am is earlier, so it cannot be affected. That's where liberation is.